welcome everybody to our workshop on firescaping. And, coming up with a title for this is very interesting because even the term firescaping is evolving. So we talk now about being fire ready and fire safe. Really, tonight's discussion is going to be about how the landscape and our buildings can be modified in order to reduce the vulnerability to fire. Now, we are going to be presenting this discussion in 4 languages: English, Spanish, Mandarin, and Vietnamese. And if you are interested in hearing the lecture, I hate that word, or hearing the talk in one of those languages, English, stay here. And if it's any of the others, click on that little world sign, the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. And then also make sure that you mute original audio so that you don't hear me talking over it. And you will have a wonderful interpretation of the entire proceedings. This evening's workshop is sponsored by Valley Water, and we're very excited to have them here with us this evening. I'm going to turn it over to Santa to talk a little bit about what's going on at Valley Water.
Thanks, Pamela. All right, good evening, everyone. This slide is just telling you that an email will be sent out tomorrow after presentation containing some of the links that we talk about and some resources. As Pamela mentioned, I'm Sana. I'm a water conservation specialist here at Valley Water. And before we get into the Firescaping webinar, I'm just going to be going over a few of our conservation programs. Next slide, please. All right. Why is water conservation important? Obviously, the less water you use, the less money you spend. Other than that, we also want to ensure a reliable water supply for the future, reduce the amount of water that's imported from the Sacramento Delta, which uses energy, reduces pollution from runoff, and reduces greenhouse gas emissions. And these last few points are super important when we're talking about, increasing fire risk in our world. Next slide. This is how water is used in Santa Clara County. 55% of the water in the county is actually used in residential landscapes and indoors. So about half of that goes to outdoor water use and half of it goes to indoor water use. And you can see the breakdown of indoor water use on the right. We do have some programs to address indoor water use as well as outdoor water use. Next slide. We have a ton of programs here at Valley Water for outdoor conservation, indoor conservation. We also have outreach and education. I'm going to be going over a few of the programs that we offer, but I'll mention gray water rebates, our landscape rebates, some surveys, and some free things that you guys can get. Next slide. So this is our online shopping cart. We have a shopping cart on our website where you can order free water conservation tools. So this includes hose nozzles, toilet flappers, leak detection tablets, aerators, as well as we have sustainable guidelines that G3 actually developed and all kinds of literature on there. As long as you are within Santa Clara County, you can order these for free. We don't charge for shipping. Just put that order in and our program manager sends these out to you. Next slide. A program that I want to highlight is our landscape survey program. We have a couple of different ones based on the size of your site, but our WaterWise outdoor surveys, which is for residential properties and small commercial, industrial, and institutional properties. We have an irrigation professional come out and actually evaluate your irrigation system, turn it on. They can help you program your controller. They'll identify leaks or any other problems you have, and they can refer you to our programs that could help. We have tons of irrigation programs or rebates, such as taking out sprinklers and putting in inline drip, or, ripping your lawn out, and things like that. The large landscape program is a similar program for large sites over half an acre. Professionals can provide a water budget or an irrigation and landscape survey. Next slide, please. Okay, our landscape rebate program is our flagship program here at Valley Water. We offer up to $3,000 for residential sites and up to $100,000 for commercial sites. These may vary depending on what city you're in or what retailer you have, because some of them do cost share with us. But our landscape conversion rebate, which is probably the most popular, we help replace high water use grass or swimming pools and put in low water use plants and landscape. The base rebate is $2 per square foot, but again, like I said, we do have some cost sharing retailers and cities. And this is a super great program. We also launched a design assistance program last year, which I manage. We have partnered with some designers that will come out and actually do a little, consultation on site and see how you can utilize our program. And this is a $200 rebate that's separate from the $3,000 that gets rebated once you finish your program or finish your project. We also have a lawn to mulch land rebate that's for bigger sites, and this just kind of bypasses that plant requirement that we have for very large sites that just want to rip out lawn and put in mulch. Next slide. I mentioned our irrigation equipment upgrades earlier. Like I said, we have inline drip irrigation rebates, high efficiency nozzles. So if you want to take out sprinklers and put in more efficient ones, as well as controllers and rain sensors, flow sensors, hydrometers, lots of things. We also rebate for rainwater capture. So rain barrels or cisterns, which are just very big rain barrels, or rain gardens. And these can all be implemented in downspouts if you have those at your home. Next slide. And our gray water laundry to landscape rebate. This is a super cool rebate for utilizing water in your clothes washer and diverting it to your landscape. And no permit is required for this project. And we offer a rebate of $200 or $400, depending on what city you're in. And if you DIY this project, that rebate amount should cover most of the equipment costs. We do have some requirements for this, and you can find all of that on our website, watersavings.org, and lots of different information and videos on gray water systems on there. And the last program I want to talk about is our water waste program. This is, we get reports of water waste from residents every single day, and our water waste team goes and checks it out, or they provide education. We'll send a mailer saying, hey, someone identified your water waste, such as, sprinklers that are broken or people watering concrete, and we'll send them resources as well as point them towards some of the programs that we have that they can use. You can call this number. We have an email as well as an Access Valley Water site. That's all on this slide. And if you have any questions, you can put those in the Q&A chat, and me and my coworker Nick can answer those. Next slide. Okay, I do want to plug our next webinar, which is August 28th. It's on efficient supplemental irrigation at the same time. Other than that, here's our website. We also have a hotline that is manned during typical work hours by our intern team, and then a conservation email as well. All right, I'll pass it back to G3. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Santa. I want to let people know again that this particular program is going to be recorded, and it is also being presented in 3 other languages, in Spanish, Vietnamese, and Mandarin. And you can get that interpretation right along with the talk by clicking on the World button at the bottom of your screen, and then selecting the language that you would like to hear the presentation in. Make sure you mute the original audio. And again, Q&A is open at the Q&A buttons. Just click on those and you get Marianne Simon in the back. She's right there waving, and she will be answering questions along with all the people from Valley Water. Okay. Let's do our very first little bit of action. So we're curious, have any of you taken any of the other classes that we have presented with Valley Water? And none is an option. It's at the bottom of the screen. And this is not, we're curious about how we're doing. There is going to be a survey at the end that will be asking you questions about, for example, how you heard about the class and so forth. And we really would love it if you would answer that survey and give us the feedback so that we can actually improve. And we're delighted to see that people have been taking these other classes. And yeah, we're delighted to have you here tonight. So we'll just take another minute or two. It's quite a few people, so I think it's going to take a minute. It does look like most of you are new to the program, which is wonderful. I'm so glad. Glad to have you, and hope you'll tell your friends and bring them to the next class on irrigation coming up next month. All right, so let's go ahead and end the poll and see what the results are. Okay, well, it does look like most of you are new, and that's wonderful. Thank you for attending, but other classes have been attended. It looks like Rainwater is maybe the winningest class, or at least neck and neck with Watershed Wise Landscaping. Okay, let's go ahead and end, and now we begin the program. All right, so tonight's workshop is divided into these 6 topics. We're going to start with what we call the Watershed Wise Approach, which is a general approach to landscaping that includes firescaping. We'll talk a little bit about fire ecology and then how we change the balance from the way things have really gone for the last century. We'll talk about protecting structures, which is becoming more and more important as we have more homes going into the wildland urban interface and as fire is actually moving more into urban areas. We'll talk about design considerations in landscaping and then how maintenance of the landscape and of your home actually plays a really big role in reducing your vulnerability. So let's start with the Watershed Wise approach. All of the things that we talk about having to do with landscaping come back to the idea that we are trying to landscape to create a balanced watershed. And what we mean by that is we are looking at every single property as though it is a mini watershed, and we are applying principles to that mini watershed in order to create the balance that you see here. And in the balanced watershed, water is actually held by the landscape when it comes from the sky in whatever form, rain or snow in some cases, and even just fog. All of that is held by plants and in the soil. And in doing so, it hydrates the landscape, it hydrates the plants, and it actually returns water to the water table where that is appropriate, or it enhances stream flow or other, or rivers. And the whole important part of this is that water is in cycle. And if we don't have landscapes, we won't have that water cycling. So not only will we not be holding on to water and hydrating, but we also won't have water that is put back up into the atmosphere to cool the land. So landscapes are super important. And this idea of having the balanced watershed is really where everything that we talk about is always going to come back to the importance of this. And I think it's also important for you to understand that firescaping or creating fire-ready landscapes is really not a sacrifice in design. It's a general design consideration. It's not something like unique and special. It's just something that we include. And if we are doing good watershed-wise design, fire-ready design is embedded in that. So you really don't need to change your design intent. You don't need to change your aesthetic. You just need to be aware of what some of these issues are. And especially when it comes to home hardening, there are things to think about. So we'll get to that in a second. The most important thing for all of our watershed-wise design is building healthy living soil. Living soil acts like a sponge. It holds on to water in dry times and it releases it slowly in wet times. So it's just as important in the drought as it is in the flood. And the thing about healthy living soil is if you have healthy living soil, your plants are hydrated. They are more fire resistant as a result of that. We capture and hold on to rainwater in that healthy living soil. So we direct it from our downspouts, from our roofs, from hard surfaces. We want to keep the water on the property instead of allowing it to just run off into the street and into waterways. It's more valuable to us in the landscape. We want to plant with local climate appropriate plants. Now, these are going to be, native plants in places where, in wherever you are, that's going to be the best local climate appropriate plant. But there are others that can be used. And so it's really more about making sure that we are planting, that we're not allowing the soil surface to be bare. We're not allowing it to, we're not just allowing it to be baked by the sun. We have lots and lots of plants there, or we have good mulch on the soil. It's always covered, and the best thing, of course, is having these plants. And our goal with irrigation and also with all the other principles that we just talked about of the healthy soil and holding rainwater and selecting plants appropriately, our goal is really to manage what we call the green water zone. The green water zone is the most important thing for fire safety that there is. This is the root zone of plants. The root zone of plants hold on to more water, more fresh water than any other source on the planet. It's the most valuable resource that we have in terms of water. And we can have this green water cistern, if you will, on our property if we attend to it. And if we use the principles of the watershed-wise approach, we go a long, long way toward reducing our requirement for water, having healthy plants, and also putting ourselves into a better position with regard to fire. Okay, so let's talk about where fire ecology plays a role in all of this. Historically, there was a role for moderate fire in our watersheds. It's natural and and unstoppable, really. I mean, lightning creates fire, dry conditions with lightning and so forth. That's been there for a long time. And in our California environment, there are many native plants that are actually adapted to or actually require fire in order to germinate. You might be surprised to know that ceanothus and many of our chaparral plants have adaptations to fire where they resprout after fire, or their seeds really only germinate after they're scarified by fire. Sequoias are an excellent example of a plant that, they will go for a very long time without being able to have seed germinate, but after fire, you get another growth of sequoia. So there are a lot of plants that fit into this, and it was an important thing for the regeneration, really, of our landscapes, meaning our wildland landscapes. A moderate fire would clear the forest floor and create the opportunity for new growth. It would be very important in our savannas and grasslands because it would halt succession. Succession is the process by which a landscape moves from being a grassland into a woody area. And a fire coming through a grassland actually takes that grassland back to the conditions that are best for growing grass. And one of the reasons that we see grasses on hillsides after fires, even when they go through chaparral areas. So this halting of succession was an important part, especially in our California savannas. It clears overgrowth in waterways, which is another issue that we use a lot of herbicides to do now. And actually, that burnt material from this moderate fire could provide a nutrient to the forest itself. So when they were burning, either being burnt with controlled burns by indigenous people or being burnt through a natural process of lightning or so forth, this material would actually decompose and provide food for the microbes in the landscape. But the key is that the fire was a moderate fire. And unfortunately, we have kind of changed that balance. And what we did as a nation really was we stopped these natural fires from burning. And what happened was we ended up creating the conditions for just too much dead fuel. And there are other things that other human interventions in particular that ended up disturbing landscapes. And that disturbance created conditions for plants that were not adapted to the fire cycle to become, to aggressively move into those areas. And as a result, when we stopped the natural fire from burning, we really set up the conditions for it being quite dry and ready to burn. And now fires burn far too intensely. We've also increased our development into this wildland-urban interface area. So homes now are built really right against the wildlands, and they are vulnerable, of course, then to fire that is coming from the wildland into the wildland-urban interface. And in our urban areas, we have decreased the defensible space around our buildings. And that's not so much a landscaping issue as it is a community decision to have a lot of infill of buildings in our urban areas. The result is that we have very small distances between our buildings. And so if a fire does move from a wildland through the interface into a more urban area, it really changes. The whole tenor of the fire is different. The factors that to take into consideration become quite different when it's burning in an urban area as opposed to when it's burning in a wildland area. And this is something that we're going to explore in our discussion of the landscape design direction that we are now being given to try to reduce fire, especially in urban areas. In the wildlands, the fires have been exacerbated by drought. We have this fuel, then we have massive drought. The result is that it's really a tinderbox. And we've had attacks by bark beetle and other pests that are essentially being supported, if you will, by the drought conditions and by the some of the interventions that we have taken to try to restore forests, even where we've restored wildlands with what are essentially monocultures instead of trying to create real polyculture landscapes in the wildlands. This is a challenge because those monoculture landscapes are actually much more vulnerable just to drought, of course, and also to these pests. And we have a lot of open space that has been overrun by invasive species, again, because there's been a lot of disturbance in the wildland areas. It creates an opportunity for species that are very, very aggressive to come in, and because there hasn't been an allowance for regular burning, they do take hold. So we have to come up with some solutions, and some of the solutions are very big picture. One of them is really rethinking development and thinking more carefully about how we how we create our communities vis-a-vis the wildlands. So instead of having what is called intermix, which is what you see on the left, where there are communities that are essentially surrounded by wildland and they are mixed into that wildland, rethinking this development to be more distinct. So the communities themselves are actually distinct from the wildlands. The wildlands are allowed to remain and be managed as wildlands. The communities are going to be managed more as urban areas. And also the trend now for us to really be thinking about defensible space, meaning how do we have development where we're allowing enough density for our communities, but we are giving enough space for, between buildings so that there can be a defense. In an urban setting, if there is a setback between two buildings that is 10 feet or less, there's almost nothing that can be done to keep that fire from moving through that urban area house to house, because a 10-foot setback is just not enough. So there's a lot of rethinking about this, and this is something that comes up in design, of course, but also in community action. With regard to wildland interface management, the idea of regenerative land management is really becoming quite important and popular. And this is essentially the use of animals to eat the vegetation that is on our hillsides and in our wildland urban interface in order to keep vegetation at bay, and also to help to try to regenerate the soil's moisture holding capacity. Super important. But this picture is actually showing where the goats and sheep stopped eating, and you can see it's quite a difference. There's also a move now toward doing more controlled burning. And controlled burning is a practice that has been practiced for thousands of years by humans in California. And it is something that is becoming much more embraced, and it is something that is being practiced in certain areas for managing wildland, especially issues, trying to do these controlled burns. And it's something that is evolving. How frequently they need to be done and so forth. This is all a part of a very exciting exploration that's happening in California and other Western states. And then, of course, there is a solution that can be found in landscape design. I think it's important for us to realize that landscape design is going to be different if we are talking about wildland urban interface homes or we're talking about more urban homes. And the different conditions are really shown in this picture. This picture was taken after a fire in San Diego County that was predominantly a grassland and wildland fire. And what I want to draw your attention to is, and this picture has been shown, it's on CAL FIRE's website. It's been shown in a lot of contexts as a really good example of how to create defensible space around a home, for fire readiness. And yes, indeed, for a grassland fire, you can see the fire came right up to this area and right up to this home, and it was essentially stopped. And what are some of the things that contributed to that? Well, certainly the massing of the plant material almost as hedges around the edge of the landscape. It's clearly a well irrigated landscape. The grass is very well irrigated around the home. But it's interesting, and there's an area next to the home that's like a gravel area. You can kind of see it's like lighter color. It's a hardscape area, the hardscape around the pool, etc. So this is great for that wildland urban interface, yes, having lots of open defensible space, well irrigated ground cover, and groupings of plants that can block some embers. But something that's very interesting here in this picture, I think, is if you look closely at the house, you can see that there are several plants and trees that are actually quite close to the house. This is something that would be difficult in an urban area to justify, because in this particular case, we would be concerned about what's called a fire ladder. And I'm going to show that to you in just a minute when we go through some of the specifics of the design. But I'm pointing out really that there's going to be a difference in the way that we approach design, landscape design, if we are talking about a wildland interface um, situation, or we're talking about an urban situation. So let's talk about protecting structures. I don't know if you knew this, but 60 to 90% of homes, buildings, are burned due to embers. It's actually embers that are the source of a lot of this fire destruction. And so how do we deal with that? Well, one of the ways that we can deal with it is, especially in a wildland interface area, is reduce the dead fuel. Now, this picture is a very controversial picture. And the reason it's controversial is because it kind of looks like almost everything was removed from this hillside, except for the tree in the upper right-hand corner and the opuntia, which is that succulent, or the cactus that's down in the left-hand corner. It kind of looks like this crew is removing everything. And that very well may have been the standard up until very recently. But recent studies that are coming out of the fires in California over the last 5 years are indicating that removing all of the vegetation from hillsides is not helping reduce fire. What needs to happen is that the plants need to be maintained properly. It's the dead material that is contributing to the fire. Plants that are thriving, that are green, are actually, in many cases, creating a fire break. So this whole idea of just denuding a landscape is something that is really becoming a big topic of conversation, and we're now trying to train maintenance people, and even, dare I say, training CAL FIRE to understand what the difference is between chaparral that is healthy and living and dead material that does need to be removed. Creating breaks that interrupt a fire's path are super important. Actually, I recently went to an event where I was shown this technique of planting agave on hillsides, on the contours of hillsides, predominantly to be a fire break. And it's a very interesting technique. It's very difficult for them to burn. They're filled with a lot of liquid. And it makes a really good case for creating a living fire break on hillsides. We want to increase firefighter accessibility. And that means really taking a look at our whole property and thinking, how does somebody with a lot of equipment on their person and maybe even some equipment in tow, how do they move around my property? Are the stairs wide enough? Are the gates wide enough? Are there pathways that they can follow easily to get from one part of my landscape to another? And so increasing firefighter accessibility is super important. It's important, of course, in urban areas, and it becomes even more important in that wildland interface area. We want to harden our houses. And here are some key ways that we can harden our houses against fire. The first and most important thing is that we can change out our roofs. If we have roof material that is combustible, like this shake roof, and I'm pretty sure none of you do, I hope none of you do, it needs to be replaced. It should be replaced with something that is a much lower combustible choice. Metal roofs are the best. And after that comes concrete tile, clay tile after that, and then a little bit less so fiberglass, asphalt, composition shingles. You're looking for material that is fire rated, that has a time frame. It needs to burn for at least an hour, or it takes a long time to ignite. These are things that are tested, and all roof materials have ratings on them. You need to be thinking about this if you replace your roof, and you need to be thinking about it if you do have a roof that is combustible. Boxing in the eaves, super important thing to be doing no matter where you live. And you can see here the difference. On the on the right-hand side, we have what's called an open eaves structure. So we have an overhang on the house. That's perfectly fine, and it's great for shade. But what happens when there's all this open area underneath that overhang where an ember can get embedded and start a fire in the roof? That needs to be boxed off and closed so that embers are not able to get up into that into the structure, into the attic essentially. Installing gutter guards. So if you have gutters on your home, that is terrific. But having a gutter guard is really important because first of all, it makes it a lot easier to harvest your rainwater, nice and clean, coming down your gutters, coming down your downspouts. But also this keeps debris from building up in your gutters and creating a place for embers to be able to take purchase. The other thing I want to point out in this picture, which I think is something that's way overlooked in house hardening, is if you see how the shingle, asphalt shingle roof comes down, then there's this kind of gray thing underneath it. That is a flashing. And that flashing not only is helping the water to drip off of the roof and into the gutter, but it's also keeping it's keeping a barrier so that if an ember did come up, it wouldn't be able to get under that roof material. It wouldn't be able to get in there at all. So having good flashing is also an important part of hardening your home. You want to make sure that all vents are covered with screens. And this is true for both the vents that are up in the upper part of your home and also the vents that might be down at ground level. They both need to be covered with 1/8 inch opening. That's the maximum size, 1/8 inch, and metal screens. And the reason again is just think about what happens when embers come in here. So embers fly into the attic here and start a fire in your attic and your house is gone. And the same thing underneath. If embers can get in underneath the house and burn up through the floorboards, it's not a good thing. So you want to make sure that all vents are covered with the metal. Siding choices, we want to make sure that we're using siding that is fire rated. And so that means that we are looking at not having wood siding or even vinyl siding. We want to make sure that things are either stucco covered or there's some kind of a veneer on the material on the front of the house. And even if you are going to be doing siding, that it's a fiber cement siding or cementitious siding. These are all important things, again, for keeping embers from being able to find purchase. Here's something that a lot of people don't think about when they're doing home improvement and landscaping projects. They're building a deck or they're building fences or they're building gates, and they opt for wood fencing, let's say. And that fencing, in order for privacy, comes right up to the house and attaches to the house. Or you have a set of stairs coming up to a part of the house and they're made out of wood. Well, it looks great, but the problem with it is that it's actually going to be almost like a fire ladder. In other words, if one portion of that fence does start to burn, the fire will just follow the fence right to your house. So there needs to be a gap between where you have a wood structure and where you have your home. Better yet, build out of metal, build out of cementitious material or stone. You want to make sure about your storage. Now, here's a thing that is basically saying no wood stored to or next to or under your home. I mean, you would be amazed. I've been a landscape designer for over 20 years, and you would be amazed how many homes I go to, and there's a store like paint cans and maybe even an extra uh, gas container or an empty gas container, that for the grill or all kinds of things get stored. You know, we have limited space. So they get stored, they get stashed away, maybe in a little shed that's right next to the house, or they get put under the house, under a set of steps or whatever. Yeah, that's a fire hazard for sure. So those are some things to take into consideration for hardening your home. Now, what are some design considerations for the landscape? So these two things work together. You can have all the great landscaping that you want, but if your home isn't hardened, it's the landscape is not going to stop the fire. We want to talk about the difference between what is defensible and what is survivable. So defensible is really the thing that we are homing in on. We want to be able to give firefighters access to the property so that they can defend the property, they can defend a neighborhood. Survivability is more about, if a firefighter can't get there, what are we going to do to try to ensure that it doesn't burn in the first place? So home hardening is a big part of survivability. Defensibility starts to come a lot into the landscape design. We need to remember that the things that stoke a fire, and oh, by the way, this is a really bad idea. This picture is a terrible idea. Yeah, yeah. So gas-powered engines are actually one of the main causes of fire in neighborhoods. So you definitely don't want to have gas-powered engines, but you definitely don't want to stoke a fire this way. But dead fuel is something that stokes fire. Not having plants that are well maintained, allowing a lot of buildup of dead material, even if that's the natural case of things. A heartbreaking dead fuel thing for me as a designer is the dead plant material on palm trees. It's heartbreaking for me to remove it. I like the aesthetic of it removed, but I also realize that it is an important habitat, and no, not for rats. I mean, it is a habitat for rats sometimes, but it's also a habitat for all kinds of birds and all kinds of other small mammals and lizards and so forth. So it's heartbreaking to know, oh, in the urban setting especially, I have to remove that because I need to reduce the dead fuel in my property. Wind is a major factor. So when we are in high wind conditions, the fire is an issue, and topography is too. One of the things that is happening with fire is as the fire is burning up a hill, hot air is actually rising, and so that and it's such an incredible intensity. I mean, 600, 700, 1200 degree heat. The hot air is rising so fast that it dries out. It sucks all the moisture out of the plant material as it goes up the hill. And so the fire is just pulled up the hill very, very, very rapidly. There are 3 fuel modification zones. And when we talk about fuel modification, what we are talking about is the removal of the dead material and making sure that we don't have fire ladders in places where that's an issue and creating defensible space. That's what fuel modification means. And we have these different zones, generally called zone 1 and 2 and 0. Zero zone is the zone right around the house. And you're going to be hearing a lot more about that in the coming years. Zero zone in California is something that is becoming codified by law. And we do need to pay attention to that because it's a key to defensibility. But zone 1 and zone 2 are important too. And they are named zone 1 and 2 because they're moving away from a structure and out into wildland. In an urban setting, you probably don't have a zone 2. You probably are only 0, might only be 0, or zone 1. Do you have a slope? And if so, how steep is it? You want to be mindful of slope because it is going to give you direction on how to space the larger shrubs and trees that you might be placing on a slope. So as you're placing trees on your slope, and it is absolutely recommended that you be placing large shrubs on slopes, especially native plants. I mean, these are plants that are going to be able to hold a slope and are going to be able to live without supplemental irrigation. I mean, this is exactly what we need to be doing, is restoring our chaparral. And when we are planting, we want to be thinking about the fact that if we are in a place where there's a possibility of a fire ladder happening, in other words, one thing burning at the bottom of the slope and then that fire essentially being carried up into the canopies of trees and so forth, we want to keep a good spacing between the plants. Now, the steeper the slope, the wider the spacing between the large shrubs and the trees. That said, this particular slide is one that is highly controversial. This is changing right now in the discussion about fire management. And the reason is that in some of these wildland interface areas, the density of the shrubs actually contributed to creating an ember break. So as embers were blown upslope and as embers came up into more urbanized areas, the plant material that was planted close together and that was not filled with a lot of dead material actually kept embers from coming into neighborhoods. So there's a lot of discussion about this. We are still of the CAL FIRE mindset of making sure that we have enough space between the large shrubs and until further notice. But it's definitely something for you to think about and keep in mind. I've mentioned this idea of fire ladders before, and here's what we mean by it. In a fire ladder, a shrub might burn, and then that fire would be conveyed to taller shrubs that would be connected to the smaller shrub or to the grassland. And then in that way, that fire could jump into a canopy of a tree, and when it's in a canopy of a tree, it can jump into other trees or onto structures. This idea of fire ladders is something that came out of, again, wildland management. And certainly in the wildland interface, you want to be very, very conscious of this, because if something is coming as a grass fire or as a low chaparral fire, you want to make sure that your plants are not, right in the way of creating a fire ladder to get into the canopies of the trees near your house. So certainly thinking about these fire ladders is important. In general, what we recommend is that trees are limbed up. In other words, there are no limbs lower than a third of the height of the tree. So a third of the height of the tree is essentially trunk and bare limbs. And then after that, the canopy really takes off. In the case of shrubs, you want to make sure that you have at least the height of a shrub in between each shrub. So this means, as you can see on the picture on the right, for that little puffball of a shrub at the bottom, you want to have at least that height, 2 or 3 feet, let's say, between the top of that shrub and the canopy of a larger one. So that's what a fire ladder is and how we avoid it. In ground zero, we want no combustible material. what does that mean? Well, some interpret that as it needs to all be hardscape. It needs to all be gravel. It needs to be something that is not living. No combustibles, though, is also being interpreted as something that is well managed. So a low growing ground cover that is well irrigated, or is, if not irrigated, at least is well hydrated. So this is something that you need to look at your local, and in some cases it's hyperlocal, ordinances about this zone 0. But in general, it's no combustibles, and it's really limited to plants that are ground covery kinds of plants. You definitely want to be lifting those tree skirts up at least 6 feet, or a third of the total height of the tree, and all dead wood gets eliminated. So it's really keeping an eye on your trees and making sure they're pruned properly. And oh, by the way, that they're not over pruned. When a tree is over pruned, or pruned, just for aesthetics, it actually requires more water. It dehydrates the tree. It puts the tree into a vulnerability in the case of fire. So it's just the right amount of trimming, and it's essentially removing dead and diseased material. Having a non-combustible permeable pathway is really something that you want to be doing. So this is flagstones with gaps between it, or in the case that you see here, it's a decomposed granite. The jury's out whether decomposed granite is really permeable or not, but it's more permeable than other surfaces. Having gravel, etc. This is what you want to have for your pathways around the home. And stone or concrete steps, walkways that are stone, and well-hydrated plant material, well-hydrated. Doesn't mean you can't have shade, doesn't mean you can't have trees. It just means that it needs to be well-hydrated, and it shouldn't be touching the home. I know the one on the left, the picture on the left looks like it's touching the home, but it's not. I have to say that every time because it's so, the image is a little misleading. In this 0 zone, a judicious use of rock is, permitted or is encouraged. And I say judicious use because we don't want to get carried away with the use of rock in a landscape. When we are putting rock down as mulch, or rock everywhere, or decomposed granite everywhere as mulch, essentially hardscaping our landscape, we're doing the exact opposite of making the landscape, making our community less vulnerable to fire. We're making it more vulnerable. Why? Because we're raising the temperatures and we're dehydrating the landscapes. So just enough rock to create a defensible space, 5 feet maximum. And after that, you don't need to do much else. And low growing ground cover is great. This is thyme, it's irrigated, it's very low growing and manageable. Capture and holding rainwater in this 0 to 5 area is great, especially right at the 5-foot mark. Having some rainwater catchment there. I mean, it's basically, I've heard people talk about it as the moat around the house. This would then be the most hydrated soil. It would be a place that, using the rock is a good aesthetic. And on top of it, now we're capturing the rainwater there. So this is super hydrated soil. Also, capturing rainwater as a backup water supply is a possibility. This is something that you might want to consider, to have rainwater to be able to put out on a landscape in front of a fire. So if the conditions are, good for fire, in other words, it's very, very dry, you've got windy conditions, etc., then you might want to be using water out of a backup water supply like a cistern, putting it out into the landscape to get things hydrated, to get the soil wet, etc. You can use a solar pump for that, and it ends up being a really good water backup. consider doing a natural lawn. A natural lawn is a lawn that doesn't require as much water, but is still holds on to a lot of water and is really great for that 0 to 5 zone. It's got multiple things going on in it. As you can see here in this picture, it's not just a monoculture of grass. And it ends up being a really good green sward around the house. There are also some plants like sedums and echeverias and other succulents that are wonderful for this particular zone, the 0 to 5 zone. The erigeron that you see at the top left, don't be fooled by its name, seaside daisy. It's not just for the seaside. It works in other places too. It's a low-growing evergreen plant, perennial. And then also ground covers like, the wild strawberry and others are great as ground covers in that area. And I showed you some others with the thyme and with yarrow and even the lawn. You want to make sure that in the winter time, you are maintaining regular irrigation. So for most of us, we are told that we don't want to be, and it's correct, we don't want to be irrigating in the wintertime. That is when our plants that are adapted to our climate want water, but they should be getting it from rainfall. So you shouldn't need to be irrigating. But if it is a dry winter, this is the time to be irrigating and managing your irrigation, especially if you have dry adapted plants. If you have plants that are adapted to getting their water content in the winter and holding it through the summer, like our California native plants, they need to be irrigated in the winter if it's dry. Keeping that soil moist in the wintertime is really, really important. And that is an important thing to battle the possibility of a fire in the dry times. So zone 5 to 30, which is, again, in an urban setting, that's probably all you have. Again, you're keeping dry vegetation and dead vegetation to a minimum. So you are managing this landscape. Grasses get cut down after they bloom. You let them bloom, you give them a week or two, after, maybe a month for birds to enjoy them, and then you cut them down. That material can be left as mulch if it's chopped and dropped. That's perfectly fine, especially if your soil is biologically active and it's decomposing things. That's perfectly fine. But you don't want it dry and standing up like that. You want it in a way that it can actually decompose. Trees are limbed up. That's pretty much universal. And the plants are well maintained and hydrated. So this is the kind of thing that can happen in the 5 to 30 zone. Yes, some succulents. Yes, a little bit of gravel ground cover and some manzanitas. Here we have Salvia spathacea, which is a wonderful plant, any zone, especially if you have a little shade. And here we have some caryxes. We've got a bunch of California native grasses and heucheras, a little bit of succulent. All of that is great. Here we have some yarrows and bidens and a bunch of other great things, of Franthes down here in convolvulus. Lots of things that you would see in a usual landscape, well hydrated and doing their thing. The 5 to 30 zone is a place where creating a fire break might make sense. So a fire break made out of rock, a gabion wall, or even doing a fire break, as I showed you earlier, of agaves. It is being shown from recent fires in Southern California that even creating fire breaks of dense native plant material or even non-native plant material, believe it or not, Rhaphiolepis created fire breaks in some of these urban areas. So having a dense planting of those plants, they're well hydrated, no dead material on the inside of them, can really create, be a valuable thing in the landscape. If we have enough space to do it, planting our beds more densely, but then creating wider pathways between the beds so that a firefighter could navigate this yard. And also that walkway does create a fire break. Now, remember, in the urban settings, all this is almost out the window because the fires are started by embers. They're not really started by fires, you know, doing the fire ladder or burning in that way. They're really being blown into landscapes. And so this is a good idea. It's a good defensible thing. And at the same time, it's not going to save anything. It is just going to be make it more defensible, which is actually the important thing. When we have hillsides or when we're planting, we want to remember that if a fire does happen, and after that fire, we are going to be in a situation where landscapes don't have any plant material on them. And so we need to plant plants that are going to help us to avoid the erosion of those sites. So planting things like the ceanothus and the toyon, both of which have adaptations to a fire, and thinking about things like Encelia and the eriogonum, the buckwheats and the sunflowers. These are things that have adapted to hillside holding, adapted to managing erosion. And again, making sure that we are contouring our landscapes. In the 5 to 30 zone, this is a great place to do some contouring for rainwater capture. Just making sure you have sheet flow on the landscape. Keep every drop of water on that landscape. And using drip irrigation is best in this zone. Look, if a fire comes through your landscape, the mulch is going to burn, the drip irrigation is going to burn, the irrigation system is going to burn. If your PVC pipe is at the proper depth of at least 6 inches, but even deeper than that, 12 inches, for your lateral lines, it's possible that they will not burn if the fire comes through very quickly and is not an intense fire. So having drip irrigation is the best anyway for the plant health. So drip irrigation. I've heard people argue, oh no, you should always have spray irrigation, especially, if you're in a fire zone. I'm like, it doesn't matter. Have you seen a fire zone? the, the heads are all completely melted. It does not matter. Now, you might have a supplemental spray irrigation that is just a backup for if it is, particularly hot or fire is, predicted, basically. It's like the fire conditions. You may want to use a spray irrigation as a supplement, but drip irrigation is always the best way to go for delivering water to the roots of the plants, unless you have a very, very large area, in which case spray. Anywho, as you go into the zone 30 to 100, now this is officially zone 2, again, no dead vegetation and basic maintenance. Here, you're really just trying to keep things healthy. Think about removing some of the more flammable trees and shrubs. And this is not saying that there's a hard and fast rule. It's just that we know that things like pine and palms, for example, are really vulnerable because there's just so much debris from pine tree that is just dry, flammable material, and it builds up under these pine trees, sometimes to depths of 6 to 12 inches, and depending on how maintained it all is. And this is a really ember friendly environment. I mean, there can be smoldering fires and pine duff for weeks and weeks after a main fire. So yeah, pine trees, palm trees, they, especially if their seed heads are allowed to stay on them, and the palm fronds that are dead, this is all super flammable. They become kind of like little cherry bombs that can go off. There's a little bit more discussion around eucalyptus now, as we see exactly how it behaves. It is a fire adapted plant in its Australian environment. It is probably something that you want to be thinking carefully about. And junipers and cypress, the problem that they really have is, one, they're often planted very, very close to the home. And two, they have a lot of dead material on the insides of them. And so they're very, very difficult to maintain as hydrated plants. So all of these plants are ones that you might want to consider removing and replacing with something that is, a better tree and shrub option. Coast live oaks, just time and time again, are not only making it through fires, but also creating conditions that reduce the possibility of fire. Your sycamores, desert willows, western redbuds, Pacific wax myrtle. I mean, all of these plants are far better tree options than the ones that we just talked about. Now, here's the idea of installing a redundant spray rotor irrigation system. So there are only a few of them for your yard. You're not doing a whole head-to-head coverage layout. This is really just to lay down water onto the landscape, but it is not used when a fire is on the horizon. This is used when it's a fire-warned time. It's a time when it's a very dry condition, and we want to just keep the landscape with a little bit of excess water. Remember, the fires are burning so hot that when they come into a landscape, they suck as much moisture as there can be. This is just slowing things down when you have a redundant spray, either on your landscape or on your roof. It's the same thing. Healthy living soil continues to be the number one thing that you can do to prevent fire, because it is continual year-round moisture, and it's in the soil, and as a result of being in the soil, it's also in your plants. All right, what are some maintenance things? Well, keep building that soil sponge, which means that you keep putting down compost and mulch. And I'm sure someone's going to start asking questions about mulch, and I'd love to answer them when we get into the Q&A in just a few minutes. Keeping that soil well hydrated in winter is essential, either by hand watering or by having a spray irrigation. And making sure that you are thinking about managing your landscape. And so that's going to mean, looking really carefully at things like replacing the trees, the trees like the palms and so forth, but also choosing not to plant and or removing invasive plants like these pennisedums, like the cistus, like Mexican feathergrass, the Stipa tenuissimas. These are things that are highly flammable, and they are not, and they're very difficult to keep hydrated. I mean, choose plants that have adaptations that hold on to water. These are not ones. So, yeah. What kind of mulch? Well, look, the ground needs to be covered. When the ground is not covered, the solar radiation on that ground is heating up the soil. It's heating up and dehydrating the plants. It's also killing soil microbiology. When there's no good soil microbiology, there's no healthy plant. So all of the landscape needs to be covered, either in densely planted plant material or in some kind of a mulch. And the mulch that you want to look for is essentially a living mulch. It's something that used to be alive, and it is green and brown, meaning it's not just big chunks of uh, um, wood. It's some green material, some brown material, and it's small. It's 1.5 inches max. And why do you want this small stuff? You want it because you want it to decompose. This is essentially just a couple months away from being healthy living soil. And that's what you want. If you have too big a material, it will never decompose. And that's why we avoid stuff like walk-on bark. Walk-on bark is never going to decompose. It takes forever. And that's the stuff on the lower right. We just, it just doesn't make sense. If you're going to have a walkable if you want some kind of a mulch walkway, then just use mulch that's 1.5 inches and let it decompose, and then add some more on top. We want to avoid gorilla hair or any of this shredded type of mulch. This is a wonderful way to have fire essentially just smolder in that whole thing. The rubber mulch is explosive. It's made out of a petrochemical. So yeah, you don't need that. And dyed mulches, we have a similar kind of issue. The dyed mulches are treated with a chemical. They are not decomposing fast enough. We want mulch on the ground that's going to turn into soil. That's the key. That's the reason that we have the mulch there. Definitely remove debris from roofs and gutters and from the base of walls. You can see here that this person actually had a kind of attempt at a screen on top of their gutter, but it's not being maintained. So let's make sure that gets cleaned up in the wintertime, especially. Just make sure that, yeah, base of walls, important place to remove debris from that. That's just think about it if an ember comes into the landscape. Gas-powered equipment, really, it's coming to an end here in California. There's a lot of statewide legislation reducing the availability of gas-powered equipment, but there's a lot that's legacy. So yeah, try not to use it. And let's start to clear brush and manage vegetation more with animals. I mean, I think this is the great entrepreneurial venture of the next 30 years is, urban shepherding. Okay. Fire on the horizon. Okay. So I know it says here, turn on the redundant irrigation, only if it's really far in the horizon, not if it's close. If it's close, definitely not. Get out. Don't turn on the irrigation unless it's solar pumped and it's coming out of a cistern. And that's because you don't want to be taking from the water supply. Turn off your gas lines indoors and out. This is something just to think about when you're building an outdoor fire pit or an outdoor fire or an outdoor dining area. Make those gas shutoffs accessible. Leave the gates open for firefighters. I want to talk about this particular gate because, it's a wood gate, and it would be better if it were metal. But it is attached to a metal, metal material, and the wall is concrete block, and the house is stucco. So that's a good thing. If a fire came through here, that gate would probably burn. The sides might melt, but it would probably be better if it were metal, but it would be really better if it were open so that the firefighters could access the property. Okay, so let's talk about next steps. We are going to be sending you links to resources. We've got a lot of them for this workshop. And we are also going to encourage you to take another class with us. Next time is about irrigation. We're going to be going into supplemental watering. And tell your friends about these classes. And an evaluation just came up. So I'm going to stop the presentation and we're going to take some Q&A for the next 10 minutes.
Oh my goodness. I can't tell you how many questions we got about mulch.
I knew we would.
We did. Even from the very beginning. Usually they don't come up until you start talking about it, but from the very get-go. So what size mulch, the concern that mulch helps spread the fire. So if, one fellow saying he uses drip, so does that actually give us the moisture, enough moisture in the soil that we talked about being so important? So if you just, I think, expand on those topics, people would appreciate that.
Yeah, great. Okay, so look, moisture in soil is created by microbial activity holding on to moisture. So roots and microbes are working together to hold on to moisture. That was that green water zone that I talked about at the very beginning of the talk. That green water zone, biologically active, filled with roots, it is taking whatever moisture it gets in whatever form. So if it gets it by drip irrigation, great. If it gets it from rainfall, great. If it gets it from spray, then great. That water is held in that healthy living soil, and it is distributed by the community to the plants through the microbial community. So what we need to do is take as many actions as possible to make sure that biological community is happy and healthy. And the two things that we can do to keep that biological community happy is, one, make sure there's no bare soil. Bare soil is the killer of the microbial community. So we have to have something that can decompose, because that biological community needs food, and it can't eat rock. I mean, it can eat rock over millennia, but not over the period of time that we're talking about. So we need something that is organic, that is going to be decomposed by that microbial community. So that's one. And two, we need to have a lot of roots that are going to be actually managing microbes, because the two things work together, microbes and roots. And so this is why the mulch that you're putting down on your soil needs to be really as small as possible, because you want it to be able to work with the limited amount of moisture that you have in the summertime. You're only doing drip irrigation, right? That limited amount of moisture that is available to the plants, that's available to the microbes. You want to hold in as much of that as possible. So that's why having that mulch there, but we want the pieces to be small so they can be broken down, so they can be turned into soil. And this is, I mean, that's it. That's how you make healthy living soil. There's no other way to do it. Sorry to say. And without it, we have dry conditions, we have heat gain in the landscape, we have plants that are not hydrated and not happy and healthy. And so when fire comes, they are in a much more vulnerable position because they don't have that moisture from the soil. Yeah.
I'm going to add to this mulch conversation, because I've had two questions now come in. So we talk about how mulch needs to be small and fine, but now they're getting leaf litter. So
yeah, leaf litters, I mean, leaf litter is that's exactly what you want, really, because leaf litter, the thing about leaf litter is it decomposes, you know, it's wet, right? When it comes off, usually when it comes off a plant, it's got moisture in it, and it is covered in microbes from that plant, so it's recognizable by the microbial community to be consumed and decomposed. If your leaves are too big, then you need to go over them with a mower, or you rake them up and you put them through a compost, or you put them through a chipper and put it back down. You know, it's work, it's maintenance, and that is the difference between the garden and the wildlands. If you look in a wildland scenario, underneath all the chaparral at the base of the plant are the leaves from that plant. That's how that plant is surviving on so little water without anybody else adding irrigation. Yeah.
all right, let's see. So let me pull up. We've got like 5 more minutes. Questions this is what happens. People wait till the last minute. A lot of questions, especially in the beginning, about this non-defensible space. And forgive me if you answered it in the presentation. I was busy answering questions, but people were like, you know, is it only out in the more open areas? I mean, it's definitely coming into cities as well. If there's something you'd like to expand on that conversation as well.
Well, I mean, I think it's this recognition that the fire is different in the wildlands than what it really is in the urban areas. And I mean, I think that's the issue is, okay, in the wildlands, it's more about connectivity of plant material. And the management of the wildlands so that there's not a lot of dead fuel, getting more animals back on the wildlands so that the soils are restored, so that that cycle begins to diminish from being this just, years in between burns and so forth. But once that fire starts moving into a neighborhood, then it becomes a lot more about house hardening than it does about landscaping. The landscaping, in fact, is there's a lot of discussion. It's happening right now. So a lot of this discussion is about using plants as fire breaks. So having hedges, having, dense, having tree cover, canopy cover, just not touching the house. I mean, not touching the top of the wood fence, making sure that it's, it's canopy cover that is keeping embers from coming into a landscape. So there's a lot happening now, and really it's just thinking practically. If you have X amount of money to spend, the most important thing to do, harden your house. The next most, and get those vent covers on and get those gutter guards on and all that kind of stuff. Next thing is make sure that the trees are limbed up. Make sure that they're not touching the house. Change out your fencing material, if it's touching the house, like get a metal fence instead. Hey, oh, by the way, I forgot to say this. If you have fencing around your home, put a gate in it. I know you don't like your neighbor. It's okay. But put a gate in it, because you may not have another way out of your house except through the backyard. You're going to want to have a gate there, and your neighbor's going to want to have a gate if they're trapped. So this was something that really came up in recent Southern California fires, was people had basically fenced themselves into their properties. And so think about how does a firefighter get in here to help me? I don't know. That's really all I can say, is that there was a case that was recently won by the Chaparral Institute. I mean, just really within the last couple of months, they won a massive case against CAL FIRE, because CAL FIRE was requiring the denuding of hillsides in the name of fuel modification, in the name of, hey, we want to protect people from fire. And CAL FIRE the Chaparral Institute made the point that actually in getting rid of all the plant material, you have created the conditions that exacerbate fire. So, getting rid of living plants that are putting moisture in the atmosphere and cooling the environment and fire breaking, right? That doesn't make sense. Yes, get rid of dead material, but the living plants, no, the living plants should be there. So this is all evolved thinking, it's really evolving right now.
Yeah. So we've got just a minute left. I was wondering if Sana and Nick wanted to come back, if there was anything that they would like to add or highlight as we call it an end to the evening.
Plug our upcoming webinar again on August 28th. And you can also see all our future webinars at valleywater.org/webinars. Thank you so much, G3, and everyone that joined.
Yes, yeah. Thank you for joining us and asking all those great questions. Unfortunately, we didn't get to all of them. But it has been recorded, so you can definitely come back, watch it again, share it with your neighbors. I know there were, everybody's learning something, so it's an opportunity. Certainly, you live in a fire zone or fire vulnerable zone, have them watch this video so they can get some good information as well.
There was a great question about ideal fire break distance, and I have to say 10 feet. So 10 feet is, if you get 10 feet between your property line and your home, this is a very good thing, because your neighbor has to have at least 5 feet. So that gives you 15 feet between the buildings, and that increases the survivability of your structure immensely. When you get below 10 feet between structures, It's almost nothing that can be done to keep the fire from becoming a conflagration. So think about that when you're building your new structures and your ADUs and stuff like that. But that's a good place to put a fire break, 10 feet from the house. Okay, thank you everybody for joining us this evening. You have a lot of things to do on a Thursday night, pushing the week. And we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Take care.